Welcome to the stage of history retold.
I love fighting games, and it's amazing to see the genre's popularity return in recent years, especially following the releases of new games like Street Fighter VI, Guilty Gear Strive, and Grand Blue Fantasy vs Rising, as well as the epic rise of my current favorite, Tekken 7, which may change soon since I'm having so much fun with Tekken 8 right now. Currently, Tekken is the only popular 3D fighting game series on the market, and as someone who grew up on 3D fighters, I can't help but want to see more of them strive in the same way. How has this come to be, when we've had so many great titles show up in the past? Today I'm here to explore the history of one of my favorite series that has sadly faded into the background over the years.
Soulcalibur!
Transcending history and the world, a tale of soul and swords, eternally retold.
At the very beginning of it all, in 1996, Soul Edge was introduced to arcades in Japan by Namco, led by its creator, Hiroaki Toriyama. This fresh new 3D fighting game introduced characters wielding weapons this time, similar to Battle Arena Toshinden, offering a different experience from their other new game, Tekken. A unique introduction to this game was the guard impact system, allowing players to reflect opponents, catching them off guard and leaving them open to a counterattack. I would assume this was received well back then, but it wasn't the original idea. That feature, along with a few other things prevalent in the games today, were only added into new arcade versions months after the game came out, following a lot of complaints about difficulty raised by players.
I never had such an easy victory.
The story was based back in 1583 and revolved around a demonic blade called Soul Edge, focusing on each character's lives in relation to it, especially the series' main character, Siegfried. This proved to be a great stepping stone to create unique and interesting characters from many different backgrounds, which is something I always appreciate about the Soul series, and fighting games in general. It also included a unique story mode called Edgemaster mode, where you would go on an adventure traveling around the world with a single character, following them on a quest to find Soul Edge, collecting different weapons along the way. This would become something unique to this series, and go through many iterations in newer games. For this video, I played through the whole thing, and Cervantes and Soul Edge were no joke. The game also introduced original fighting game concepts that never made it into following games, like being able to disarm opponents with enough attacks, forcing them to fight barehanded, or locking blades when both players strike at exactly the same time. These were some cool ideas, but competitively I can see how that may not have worked out too well going forward. A year later, the latest version of the game was released on PlayStation in Japan, and released to the rest of the world in 1997 under the name Soul Blade, with a roster of 10 characters, featuring a few of my personal favorites today, Taki, Mitsurugi, and Songmina, as well as Siegfried, Sophitia, Boldo, Huang, Cervantes, Rock, and Li Long, the original nunchaku wielder before Maxi. The home release also featured 5 unlockable characters, the main antagonist Soul Edge, Song Han Myung, 2 different outfit variants for Sophitia for reasons I'm sure we all know, and a possessed Siegfried, which obviously was a sign of what was to come in later games, building the foundation to creating one of the most iconic characters in the series. I never played this game growing up, but its essence and style was continued on through future games in the series, so it's always nice to look back on early ideas that blossomed in later games, making it fun to play around with now, just to see how far things have come. And that opening is legendary. My introduction to the series was with the new revamped version of Soul Edge, renamed Soulcalibur, which is a mix of the old title and the name of King Arthur's sword of legend, Excalibur. This would become the weapon introduced in this game as the ultimate counter to the evil Soul Edge. The game was released in arcades in 1998 and as a home release in 1999 on Sega's brand new console and one of my favorite consoles of all time, the Dreamcast. Before this time, arcade machines usually ran the superior versions of games in terms of graphics and performance, but in Soulcalibur's case, the Dreamcast version completely eclipsed what was in arcades. The difference here is incredible, and I can't imagine what it would have been like seeing this shift for the first time. For as long as I can remember, I always preferred modern or sci-fi settings more than anything, but with Soulcalibur, that thought never crossed my mind. I was hooked by the music and unique designs for each character. Of course, it's natural for characters in fighting games to differ in fighting style, but something about having different weapon styles in the game was so interesting to me, especially since the weapons themselves come in all different shapes and sizes, adding even more personality to the characters using them. Playing this game again felt amazing. All the nostalgia rushed back to me as I went through unlocking all the different artwork for the museum and got swept up in the world and characters again. I loved watching the characters' martial arts demonstrations you could catch at the start menu too, which were also unlockable to view at any time. I'd never seen anything like that at the time. I thought it was such a cool idea having each character show off their signature style with such great animation. Killit became a character I was very fond of for his overall design and fighting style, along with Song Mina, as they shared a lot of moves. Back in the day, this was around the time I really started to get into Kung Fu movies, and it reminded me of the fighters I saw. This game again was led by Hiroaki Toriyama, and he, along with his team, reportedly worked very closely with the Tekken dev team, who recently released the legendary Tekken 3 a year prior, sharing all their ideas in order to craft the best game they could at the time. Looking back, it definitely paid off. The major new introduction to this game that set it apart from Soul Edge and other fighters like Virtual Fire and Tekken was the 8-way run, a staple feature in the Soulcalibur series now. Instead of the usual movement players had seen in other games, where characters can only move forward, backwards, and step to the left and right, Soulcalibur introduced the ability to freely move in any direction you point your joystick, giving a much more fluid feel to movement. I loved this aspect of the game, and I'm sure a lot of players did at the time too, seeing as it gave a unique approach to positioning your character strategically, and feel a larger sense of realism in combat. They also revamped the guard impact ability, adding a more offensive way to use it by parrying your opponent as opposed to only reflecting it. Again, adding more depth to the combat. Instead of Edgemaster mode, Soulcalibur featured a mission mode, which operated in the same way, but instead of collecting different weapons, you unlocked points to buy all the beautiful artwork in the game, and in turn unlocking more fights.
Versus Inferno.
The mode starts off with a tutorial for all the game's mechanics, with a very interesting character called Edgemaster, who was said to be someone who collected and mastered a wide variety of weapons. Sounds familiar, doesn't it?
Fight!
This was the start of a new age in the series, adding new characters to the mix, like Shanghua, Maxi, Ivy, Astaroth, Killick, Nightmare, Edgemaster, and Lizardman, who were either closely or loosely based on existing characters from the previous game.
Transcending history and the world, a tale of souls and swords, eternally retold.
After 3 amazing years of Soulcalibur, it was time for Namco to unveil their new sequel to the series, Soulcalibur 2. This game unexpectedly leaped to a whole new level of popularity among players, after the negative reception of Namco's latest major title, Tekken 4. Tekken 4 was Namco's newfound direction for the series, ushering in a darker, more mature tone. These changes were not just aesthetic either, as they overhauled a lot of the game's core systems. This wasn't something a lot of Tekken fans appreciated at the time, so many stopped playing the game.
Game over.
Now with no Tekken to play, players started to look elsewhere for another fighting game to enjoy. And Soulcalibur II couldn't have been released at a better time.
Haven't you had enough?
Yes, this is it.
It was with this legendary game that my love for Soulcalibur solidified. Soulcalibur II is the pinnacle of the series for me, as it was one of those games where the developers got just the right balance of gameplay, characters, and presentation, encased in one perfect package. I still remember the days of me running through the arcade mode non-stop, trying out every single character in the game and discovering who I liked most, while appreciating the game's beautiful graphics and animation. This time round, Maxi became someone I easily gravitated towards, with his simple yet cool design and eccentric voice lines. I didn't play her much at the time compared to now, but I also took an interest in Taki, for the simple fact she was a cool looking ninja. Like my favorites in other fighting games, Kage from Virtual Fire, and Hayabusa from Dead or Alive. As well as adding 5 more original characters, Necrid, Cassandra, Yunsung, Raphael, and Talim, Soulcalibur II was the first game to introduce guest characters, with each console version getting a unique character. I had the PS2 version with Heihachi, which is funny now because I didn't know much about the character at the time, since I somehow didn't grow up playing much Tekken. What's even more interesting about the PS2 version though, is according to some reports, Heihachi was a late decision close to the game's release, as initially Namco planned to add Cloud from Final Fantasy VII into the game. For a now huge FF7 fan like me, that would have been incredible. But who knows, maybe we'll see a character from FF7 in one of Bandai Namco's newest titles. The Xbox version included the comic book character Spawn, and the GameCube version topped even that by introducing Link from the Zelda series in the game. What a time to be alive that was. What really made Soulcalibur II stand out from everything else, however, was just how good the game felt to play. Hiroaki Toriyama and his team absolutely hit the sweet spot with this game, making the balance between offense and defense equally as fun for both casual and hardcore players. Some things in the game that pro players utilize you could say were bugs, like 2G, step guard, and a few other techniques. But at the end of the day, it's what added to the nuance of the combat for them. And I don't see that as an issue at all, especially if it created depth in the gameplay people could buy into. I didn't know a thing about these advanced techniques, but even at that point, I couldn't get enough of trying out all the characters and their unique weapon styles throughout all the different modes. Speaking of different modes, there was a lot of similar content between this game and the first Soulcalibur, although the version in this game is very grindy and not nearly as fun to play through as Soulcalibur 1 in my opinion. I preferred the other way of just unlocking artwork in the previous game, but this version had a larger variety of mission structures and objectives to play through, so there was still a lot of fun to be had. All in all, Soulcalibur 2 was a major success, and withstood the test of time even till today with its unique and nuanced combat system, cementing itself in the competitive scene and creating long-time fans of the series like myself.
Out of my way!
It truly is one of the greatest fighting games ever made. But from this point on, how did things come to change?
Soulcalibur III.
This is when things started to go south, as the series began to slowly fade away from the main stage and drift to the state it's in today. Starting off with a genuinely great game, Soulcalibur III in 2005. After the boom of Soulcalibur 2, you would expect the series to kick on from there, but unfortunately, this wasn't the case. Content-wise, Soulcalibur 3 was one of the best in the series, offering a generous amount of solo content. Instead of arcade mode, Soulcalibur 3 had Tales of Souls, a mode pretty much like arcade in previous games, with a little extra, featuring fights against enemies not on the character roster, and even quicktime events at several points during your run. I did like the ending cutscenes for a lot of the characters too. They're cheesy and fun and do a nice job adding a lot of personality to each character, something this game did especially best. It also featured a completely new game mode called Chronicles of the Sword, which was a strategy mode where you controlled a created character and allies to seize all enemy bases on the map. Personally, it wasn't anything amazing, but it's a decent change of pace from other things. It doesn't end there with the content either, as there was also a tournament mode and the Soul Arena, which was a game mode full of all kinds of mission-based battles, similar to what was in the RPG modes of the last two games.
Do you now understand the difference between us?
Huang and Li Long from earlier games were brought back, and new characters Zasalamel, Tira, Amy and Setsuka were added to the game too, who I think were fantastic additions in both their look and unique weapons they wielded. Okadan and Abyss were also new characters, but Okadan used everyone's fighting styles, just like Edgemaster in previous games, and Abyss fought exactly like Zasalamel, with just a handful of new moves. Soulcalibur III was also the first game in the franchise with character creation, where you could create a new character entirely, as opposed to other fighting games with character creation at the time, like Virtua Fighter 4 and Tekken 5. This went on to become one of the biggest and well-received features in the franchise. Soulcalibur III also swayed away from guest characters being added to the roster, but added clothing items in the customization to design them instead, giving players the chance to design Cosmos from the Xenosaga series, which was very cool. At first glance, you could easily say Soulcalibur 3 was almost the same as 2, with even more content, which in many ways would be the best possible sequel, but that changed following the game's release, as things slowly started to take a turn for the worst. A contributing factor to the game's downfall seemed to have been a lack of an arcade version. In that era of gaming, you could say the beta testing grounds for fighting games were the arcades, as many games received several updates based on player feedback, before finally porting the games in their best versions to consoles. Had Soulcalibur 3 hit arcades and faced the criticism of the hardcore audience in response to its fighting system, the devs may have made some changes to the home release that could have changed this game's fate.
Fight!
After playing this game myself, I noticed it didn't feel the same way as Soulcalibur 2. I know this is a very vague way to describe it, but I'm sure people could understand. It may also be down to the character balance and moveset changes, but overall the game lacks the same magic. This is really weird as the lead producer behind all the games so far, Hiroaki Toriyama, worked on it. You could say the two games aren't vastly different on the surface, but the differences that are there pulled this one away from what made Soulcalibur 2 so great. Even though Soulcalibur 3 had a mountain of content for casual players to have fun with, there were changes made to the game that made it quite unattractive to the competitive scene. To name a few things, Soulcalibur 3 removed techniques like advancing and retreating guard, step guarding, and guard impact mind games surrounding the 2G technique. In addition to all those changes, it was specific bugs and glitches in the game that ultimately destroyed its reputation in the eyes of some casual players and most competitive players, for both completely different reasons. For the home release, there was a massive memory glitch that would corrupt all player data, causing the player to lose everything, from their progress in all modes down to all their saved created characters. I didn't have the game back then to experience something like that, but I can imagine it would have been extremely annoying. As for the competitive players, they found a bug later known as the variable cancel, or VC for short, that was similar to 2G in Soulcalibur 2, which was a technique to cancel certain moves into a guard state, but completely broken this time, allowing players to cancel out of pretty much any animation at any time for any reason.
Yeah, he's the right for our crew. Yeah, I understand. That's all I care about.
It was clearly a problem, and it wasn't the only one. Surprisingly, Namco finally released an arcade version of the game 6 months later, fixing the VC bug, tweaking the overall gameplay feel, and rebalancing a lot of characters. Even with all their efforts to rebuild the reputation of the game at the time, the release didn't amount to much, and with the home console version only being on the PS2 right before the release of the PS3 and Xbox 360, the game was doomed, and the start of Soulcalibur's decline began.
That future starts right here, right now.
Despite all these issues, the game is still a lot of fun to play, especially with all its single-player content, with many people claiming it as their favorite in the series, even coming off the back of Soulcalibur 2. But with the next game, I couldn't say the same. 3 years later, Soulcalibur IV was released, and with the game being the first in the franchise on next-gen hardware, we all saw a massive upgrade in the graphics, but in my opinion, even more of a downgrade when it came to the gameplay.
I'm not afraid anymore.
On a positive note, Soulcalibur IV was the first with the armor break system, which was cool to see the battle damage mid-fight, adding to the improved visuals of the game. And the character customization was really fleshed out, along with all the weapons having different stats and buffs on single player modes that allowed them, which was similar to how different weapons were in Soulcalibur 2 and 3, but more developed this time. You could even unlock a few pre-made custom characters designed by several guest artists, although they shared the same movesets with already existing characters.
Save the formalities. Let's fight.
Even more new characters were added here, this time being Algol and Hilda, both with completely unique fighting styles. Unlike Soulcalibur 3, this game brought back guests, somehow featuring characters from Star Wars this time. At the time I couldn't actually believe it, and it's still crazy to see Darth Vader, Yoda and Starkiller in a fighting game. The story mode here was basically arcade mode with a few cutscenes, somewhat concluding the Soul Edge saga that had been built up over all the previous games, with Siegfried finally defeating Nightmare and completely destroying Soul Edge. It still stayed true to the series' idea of sticking with one character at a time, seeing how Soul Edge affected their lives in one way or another.
Our kind should not exist in this world. Not ever again.
The only other single player mode here was the Tower mode, similar to what you would find in Mortal Kombat games, with different missions to complete during fights on every floor. These were cool, but again I wasn't a big fan of the way the game felt to play, so it didn't grab my attention for long.
Ring out!
Another big addition was the inclusion of online versus modes, catching up to other games like Mortal Kombat Deception and Dead or Alive Ultimate for the Xbox, that had online functionality in the tail end of the previous generation. As for this game's unique mechanics, they didn't impress much either. Like I mentioned before, this game featured an armor break system, but they also added a new technique called critical finish.
Get ready! Prepare to die! Be gone!
Critical finish was an interesting concept, but I think it was poorly executed. While I played, it almost never happened, and the animations for them weren't amazing enough for them to be so rare during gameplay.
Yet another opponent unworthy of my blade.
Although I could forgive a lot of these shortcomings, one thing I couldn't get over is how sluggish Soulcalibur IV felt. Earlier I praised Soulcalibur 2 for its fast and fluid gameplay, and even though it wasn't exactly the same, Soulcalibur 3 somewhat continued that, and still remained a very fun game to fight in. But with Soulcalibur 4, they completely changed things, and I didn't like it. The direction this game went in seemed to focus more on attacking to break your opponent's guard, rather than using the 8-way run, or walk in this game's case, to position yourself well enough to evade attacks while being able to land your pokes. It's much more aggressive in the sense that you throw out more attacks naturally, but the action isn't as fluid as previous games. Also, Soulcalibur 4 took out being able to make the characters say something before fights started. I don't know why, because that was always a funny and unique thing the games had going. Soulcalibur 4 was generally received well, mostly getting praise for the Star Wars collaboration and online functionality. But I personally feel like this is the worst entry to the series yet after looking at the bigger picture. If the series continued like this gameplay wise, I think it would be in a much darker place. Having said that though, the next game may have tried even harder to alienate the fans of earlier games. 4 years later, Soulcalibur V was introduced, and this was a really weird one. I never got to play the game at the time, so I didn't know much about it until playing recently. I was so shocked after going straight to the character select screen to try out how different Taki was in this game, only to find out she was a completely different character altogether, replaced with a newer generation ninja called Natsu. It wasn't just her too. Songmina, Changhua, Sophitia, Cassandra, Zasalamel, Talim, and Yunsong were all missing. The game was clearly trying to bring in a new generation, but only replaced some of the characters? Strange. These new characters played the same as the ones they replaced, with some changes, which isn't entirely uncommon. But I like seeing my favorite characters progress through each game, receiving fun and exciting new changes to their designs, along with adding new layers to their personality.
Are you ready to die?
I don't think the idea of introducing Sophitia's children, Patroclus and Pyrrha, as new characters was a bad idea, but they could have stood alongside the rest of the iconic cast. The idea of them having different forms as completely new characters was cool too, but lacked the same impact the duo of Siegfried and Nightmare brought to the table. Back with Tekken 3, Namco made the bold decision to directly replace the main character Kazuya with his son, Jin. But in this case, it went extremely well, because Jin stood on his own as a new protagonist, with a familiar yet different iconic style and silhouette, separate from Kazuya, something Soulcalibur V completely missed the mark on with their new characters. As for other characters, I thought Viola and her crystal ball style was an interesting concept that could be expanded on in the future, but on the other hand, Zwei, to me, was such a bland character. It almost felt like I wasn't even looking at Soulcalibur game anymore with the direction they went in with some of these characters. What's funny is, gameplay wise, I think the game felt better than Soulcalibur 4, with a noticeable increase in speed and the removal of critical finishes in favour of a flashy ultimate move called Critical Edge. It was a lot like what we see in 2D fighting games, and similar to Rage Arts in Tekken 7.
The battle rages on. Stand up and show your strength.
For anyone wondering, that is Devil Jin from Tekken, but not exactly him. In Soulcalibur V, his fighting style was available for created characters, so you could say that technically he was the game's guest character, alongside Ezio Auditore, the protagonist introduced in Assassin's Creed 2, a fan favorite. I actually liked playing with Ezio in this game. He had fun little gimmicks in his moveset that were great to play around with, and he just looks cool, which is all I need.
Requiescat in pace.
The game had some very nice stages too, some that I wish came back in Soulcalibur VI. Graphics wise, this wasn't a massive jump from the last game, but they added some nice effects to movements and attacks that I enjoyed seeing, as well as some dynamic stages like the cage that unfolded as you slammed your opponents into the walls. Similar to the one in Soulcalibur 4, just better looking. One thing I didn't like about the gameplay though, was the decision to make guard impact something you needed meter to use. It really limited how often you could use it, and as a major feature in the Soulcalibur series, it was really weird to not have it available to use at any opportunity. I don't know how things went down in the professional scene, but I'm sure this made matches a lot less exciting, as it easily brings down the mind games that came out of fast exchanges of guard impacts in earlier games. As for the story, Soulcalibur V took a different approach in its focus, following both Pyrrha and Patroclus on their twisted journey. It's mainly told through a slideshow of images, which isn't great, but there are some cutscenes here and there. It isn't memorable and doesn't do any of the characters any favors in terms of making them interesting to follow.
Kali Yuga's owner is waiting outside.
In the end, this game didn't deliver, and faded into obscurity along with the Soulcalibur name for quite some time. Outside of the mainline games, the Soulcalibur series has seen a few other titles, some being fighting games and the others being a different genre entirely. It goes without saying that most of these didn't go well, but it's interesting to have a look at what Bandai Namco was trying to do back then. There was a period where every fighting game had a weird trend of doing solo action and adventure games. Some were great, and some weren't. Mortal Kombat had Shaolin monks, Tekken had Death by Degrees, Dead or Alive eventually gave us Ninja Gaiden's reboot with a great trilogy, and Soulcalibur gave us Legends. This game played like your typical hack and slash adventure, Only this time, the controls were tied to motion controls, as it was a game released on Nintendo's extremely popular console, the Wii. Surprisingly, this game also featured a guest character, and this time it was Lloyd Irving from Tales of Symphonia, which was nice to see, and very fitting actually. The game didn't score too well with reviewers though, as the controls were seen as very janky, and the story was nothing to write home about. After playing it for a while myself, I actually thought the game wasn't that bad. Each character had unique strengths and abilities picked out of their movesets from the main games, which was cool to see. However, it didn't help it from eventually getting monotonous, and the motion controls didn't work too well at the time. But I could see a younger me having a good amount of fun with it. The story though was definitely something not even worth talking about. But someone out there might like seeing an expansion of the Soulcalibur lore. Also, the music was really good in this game. It sounds familiar to Soulcalibur 2 and 3 songs, but with enough of a difference to stand on its own. Above all else, this actually made me want another action-adventure spin-off from that Soulcalibur series, but done well this time, like a Ninja Gaiden game with Taki as the main character. Soulcalibur Broken Destiny, probably the biggest spin-off title, was released in the year 2009 for the PSP. This game also featured a new character alongside its guest for the game, unlike the other spin-offs. This new character was an eccentric man named Dampierre, who had a unique clown-like fighting style that could be used to catch opponents completely off guard with his tricks. As for the guest, the game featured Kratos from the God of War series, which again was such a great idea as a guest character for Soulcalibur. His moves were all nods to the techniques and weapons he's used in several games, and it's so great to see. However, what let this game down for me was its framework. It's derived from Soulcalibur IV, which obviously carried over the weird sluggish movement from the game that I'm not a fan of personally, and the game had no multiplayer functionality. " 2012 saw the release of Soulcalibur Mobile, a Java game based around Soulcalibur IV. This was a 2D sprite-based game that still kind of used 3D mechanics to move left, right, up and down on the stage, but had watered down movesets to fit the mobile gameplay, and had a limited character roster. I downloaded the game and gave it a try myself, and it's as you would expect from a mobile Java game from 2012. I still felt compelled to beat the arcade though, and mashed my way through to the end. I'm not too sure how this game was received, but it's just a harmless game to distract you for a few minutes with a shorter version of Soulcalibur IV's story, coupled with a surprising amount of effort put into the movesets and animations. In 2013, to many people's surprise, Soulcalibur 2 HD Online was released. As the title suggests, it was a HD version of the critically acclaimed original, released on PS3 and Xbox 360, this time with online functionality. The game was received relatively well, and although being the same Soulcalibur 2 we knew and loved, with even the inclusion of both Heihachi and Spawn on the same version, it was let down by its sometimes laggy new online features. Unfortunately, the game is no longer available to access as it was removed from the PlayStation Store in 2021 and delisted from the Xbox Marketplace in May of 2022. Just a year later, in 2014, Soulcalibur Lost Souls was released for the PlayStation 3, a free-to-play fighting game based off of Soulcalibur V. Oddly enough, it was single-player only, with no multiplayer features, for a fighting game, in 2014. This game had you choose from either Mitsurugi, Siegfried, and Sophitia, and began a journey collecting new weapons and materials for crafting. During this adventure, you also had the opportunity to unlock a healthy amount of characters to use later on. It's clear to see as a free-to-play game it was focused around microtransactions, mainly around the customization options you could purchase for your characters. With its removal of core systems like multiplayer modes or even ring outs, it's no surprise this game was hit with a barrage of negative reviews, and was subsequently closed down after just a year. Within the same year, Soulcalibur Unbreakable Soul was released, and this time Soulcalibur fans were greeted with a card game released exclusively on iOS. I couldn't try this game out at all, but it seems like players didn't take too kindly to this title after looking through Metacritic, with some saying it was dull and disappointing.
Just as shadows are cast where there is light, history hides away more than one truth.
6 years after the release of Soulcalibur V, the longest gap between two mainline games, Soulcalibur VI was introduced to the world. Using Unreal Engine 4, the game boasted graphics on a level even better than the current most popular 3D fight at the time, Tekken 7.
Ah, sister! Why are you here?
Enough. Let's go back home.
Instead of carrying on from the lore introduced in Soulcalibur V, Soulcalibur VI acted as a reboot in the series, taking us back to the events between Soul Edge and the first Soulcalibur, which, after seeing how Soulcalibur V went down, was a great idea. A reason for the longer wait this time could have been because Bandai Namco were mostly against releasing another game for the series after Soulcalibur V completely failed in terms of sales. However, Soulcalibur VI was championed by its new lead producer, Motohiro Okubo, a former Tekken 7 producer who strived to bring the franchise back to its former glory, along with the backing of current director and chief producer of the Tekken series, Katsuhiro Harada. Okubo even stated that the game's codename was Luxor, due to his and the rest of the team's intentions to bring the series back to the look and feel of the first Soulcalibur.
Battle 1. Fight!
I hoped this game would be the one to revitalize the series, taking advantage of the road Tekken 7 paved for 3D fighting games in this current generation. And after playing it when it finally released, I was happy to see the game was fun, and was the closest thing gameplay wise to Soulcalibur 2, especially in terms of movement for me. Going back to this game after playing 4 and 5 recently for this video was like finally being let free to move around exactly how I liked without being weighed down. Outside of the regular online and versus modes, the game featured 2 story modes like many games in the past. One following your created character on an adventure through the world of Soulcalibur, getting stronger along the way, and the other for playing through the main storyline, mostly featuring the trio of Kilik, Changhua and Maxi, with standalone stories for every character on their journey surrounding the hunt for Soul Edge over several years. It brought back that RPG aspect that Soulcalibur V completely lacked.
Whatever we do, I think our paths will cross at some point.
These modes aren't crazy and didn't capture my attention long, but one thing that did was the game's character creation. It's very similar to what you can find in Soulcalibur 3, 4 and 5, but compared to current games like Tekken 7 at the time, it still boasted the best you could find in my opinion, and should be praised more for it. I didn't make too many custom characters myself though, since I had more fun creating new costumes for some of my favorite characters in the series. As usual, with the new game came new characters, and at launch the game introduced 3, Grow, Aswell, and a surprising but again very fitting guest character,
Geralt of Rivia,
from the Witcher series. Grow was a cool looking character to me in terms of his weapon style, but ultimately he seemed out of place with his design.
Show me what you got.
So with the game being well made on the technical side of things, and ticking most of the right boxes for fans of the series, what went wrong? Why are we not seeing anything to do with this game anymore? I believe this game was a victim of cruel coincidences, some being at no fault of its own. EVO is the largest fighting game tournament in the world, with the last one in the summer of 2023 hosting over 9,100 attendees, eager to compete and enjoy what is now also a convention. Soulcalibur VI only managed to feature in one EVO as a main stage title since its release in 2018, that being just a few months after it released. It would have featured again in the 2020 EVO, as it was announced in the lineup for main stage games, but the current state of the world at the time didn't allow for things to return to normal. The pandemic caused the world to pause, and most people spent a long period of time at home. EVO never gave up on holding the tournament at this time, and proposed an online event instead, which was great for players but wasn't in Soulcalibur VI's favour, since the delay-based netcode the game was released with just wasn't reliable enough to play a large-scale tournament on, or even good enough for many players to be attracted to play on during lockdown. Going forward, things snowballed from there, seeing Soulcalibur VI move down the pecking order in favor for newer games. Throughout this time, the game did still receive several new patches and very exciting characters throughout its season pass, like Tira, Amy, Cassandra, Hilda, Setsuka, and Huang, who hadn't been featured in the game for many years, as well as two amazing guest characters, Haomaru from Samurai Shodown and everyone's favorite, 2B, who is a beloved character among many video game fans, but was polarizing when it came to her balance in the game.
Initiating attack program.
We will continue to fight.
As an overall package for a fighting game, it wasn't the greatest, especially in comparison to titles before it in the series. But what it was to me was a massive step in the right direction for the series, and a game I always have fun playing, even now. Although despite the efforts from Okubo and his team, it seems the damage to the series Soulcalibur V made especially couldn't have been overcome with a game like this. The game went on to sell 2 million copies worldwide, as reported by Bandai Namco, which was labelled successful, but the game received no support past that point, and the lead producer, Motohiro Okubo, announced he'd be leaving Bandai Namco just a month later. It's clear the game wasn't successful enough for Bandai to continue to work on in the same way they did for Tekken 7, and I fear they may not return to the series for a very long time, especially after seeing someone so enthusiastic about improving the reputation of the franchise leaving the company. Even with the series in the state it's in today, I can't imagine this is truly the end. Somewhere, somehow, there's an idea for Soulcalibur 7 just waiting to be realized, and I'm waiting for the day that comes. But what could the game look like? What direction would they take the series? I would like to think Bandai would continue off the back of the framework Soulcalibur VI introduced, as it brought back that free-flowing and fast gameplay a lot of players longed for. This coupled with rollback netcode and improved character creation would definitely be a great start. However, how far they go with anything else may hinge on how much the game is backed by Bandai. Tekken 8 is here, and it seems like easily the most expensive Tekken game we've ever seen, with a wealth of content both online and offline for players to enjoy. This was well deserved, and logically speaking the natural next step for Tekken, seeing how well Tekken 7 did both in sales and popularity amongst the FGC. Unfortunately, you can't say the same for Soulcalibur 6, so I highly doubt a sequel would get even half as much backing. But let's dream a little, and talk about what I'd really love to see in Soulcalibur 7. First off, from a visual standpoint, I would love for the graphics to evolve again, but more importantly, I would love a rework of the art style. Although I think the current style is nice, I think it'll be nice to try a different look, moving away from the big-eyed anime look into something similar to what we saw in Soulcalibur 1, 2, and 3, or even something close to what we're seeing in Tekken 8. As for gameplay, I'd like more of what I mentioned before, that fast, free-flowing gameplay Soulcalibur 6 brought back, which was the closest thing the series felt like since Soulcalibur 2. As for all the system mechanics 6 brought along too, I wouldn't mind seeing all of them make a return, although reversal edge could be swapped out for a new mechanic, in order to change up the formula for a new game in a fun and interesting way.
Like a book.
As for single player content, I of course would like the return of RPG-like modes present in older titles, with more fun and unique minigames and missions. But I still would like to see a story similar to what Soulcalibur 5 and 6 did, but fun this time, including all characters on the roster. Pretty much like what we're seeing with Tekken 8.
Excellent.
I feel like that's one aspect the Soulcalibur series lacked. Those interactions between all the characters in the game that really bring out their personalities and appeal to all kinds of players, making them fall in love with the roster. Of course there's a massive difference in the setting between Tekken and Soulcalibur, but there are ways to really hone in on the characters' personalities within any story. Soulcalibur's story could easily fit in an RPG, and I think giving a new Soulcalibur game a proper overarching story, jumping from character to character while they form alliances and rivalries, would be really fun.
It's for your own good. What was that for?
It's not like they haven't tried to do this either. Like I've shown earlier in this video, the story modes in most of the games actually do attempt this. But they either don't focus on the characters themselves enough in favor of a variety of missions and weapon collecting, or simply aren't written well.
Xianglin?
These are fighting games after all, so great story mode content isn't that common in the genre. But nowadays, more and more titles are putting in a big effort when it comes to diving deep into the lore they've built up over the years, in order to showcase their characters in many fun ways, even outside of fights.
My child.
Silence! So this is the new host.
You have done well.
So that's it, the story of Soulcalibur so far. Over the years, these games have given me so many great experiences that have become memories I'll never forget, and I would hate to see it all end here. I hope one day we can take to a new stage and ignite our souls once again.
So, are you guys ready?
Yeah, let's go.
Hey.
I'm not gonna give up on you that easily.